After a disappointing season, Dan Hurley and UConn built a roster ready to get right back to national championship contention.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into this live Wednesday edition of the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Andy Patton, joined today by the great Leaf to Lean on our normal Wednesday shows, and you are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. I want to thank all of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Remind you that you can check out the show ad-free on Amazon Music. And of course, got to give a special shout out to those everyday listeners and those of you who are hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. Today's a special day here on Locked On College Basketball, not only a live show, but we are also doing the first of what will be many, many team previews for this upcoming season. We're going to start things off with not last year's champion, but the previous 2 years champion. That would be, of course, the UConn Huskies, led by Coach Danny Hurley. We're going to talk about their last season, what happened to UConn after back-to-back national championships to finish with just an 8 seed in the big dance and a second-round exit. We're going to talk about their offseason, what they did to kind of fix last year's issues, some additions, some guys they lost, and more importantly, some guys that they kept around for another season. We're also going to talk about their non-conference schedule, take a look at how we think they might finish in the Big East, and then, of course, answer the big question: can this team get back to being a national title contender? Very excited to talk about this UConn club with you, Leaf. We are going to start by talking about how they did last year. Obviously, it was one of the biggest storylines in all of college basketball last season, a team that was coming off back-to-back dominant national championship runs, some of the most dominant individual seasons we've seen in a really long time. That first run, UConn didn't have a game within single digits in the NCAA tournament. And yet last year, after a 4-0 start against a handful of bye games, they end up losing all 3 games in the Maui Invitational. And Leaf, that was really when we started to see that maybe the wheels were not as tight for that UConn team. You know, I think we kind of knew, like, oh, they lose Klingon, their big anchor down low. They lose Tristan Newton, who was just such a vital piece to those back-to-back national championship runs. And, you know, Isaac and I talked about this recently. We were always a little skeptical of Alex Karaban's ability to be the leader offensively for that team, as opposed to being the third or fourth option. And we kind of saw a lot of those concerns play out in Maui. At that point in the season, Leaf, how concerned were you about UConn's ability to really be back in that conversation as a title contender?
Yeah, so I actually ranked them fairly low in the opening poll. I want to say I had them 7 or 8, and that was out of respect for the year before. They were ranked second or third by most people, and I believe the AP poll had them 2 to start the season. And it was a season in which I felt like they had too many moving pieces in terms of they had such defined roles and stars that, 1, were stars, but 2, stars in their roles in the previous 2 seasons. They had matches made in heaven, like Cam Spencer replaced what they had the year before in Jordan Hawkins. And Jordan Hawkins was the star of that team. Cam Spencer was the 4th best player, and he was still a fantastic player. This year, Alex Karaban, who was a 4th or 5th option the previous 2 years, had to be the star to begin. It turns out he wasn't capable of doing so, which did not shock me. Didn't seem to shock you or Isaac either when we talked about it. But I felt like Liam McNeely was forced to elevate his game and be that star when he should have been penciled in as the 2nd or 3rd option. And it made him look less efficient and have worse games. And so I think this team really had a come to Big East play, had to figure out whose role was what, and they had to execute brilliantly. And yet, while they have excellent execution, there was so much less margin for error, as well as I think growing pains and physical pain. Aiden Mahaney didn't pan out, and Hassan Diarra was injured. And so I think they really had an uphill battle, and this year's team is replenished and looks significantly better. Maui was certainly eye-opening. I didn't expect them to go 0-3, but I also didn't expect them to win it. I remember seeing the Auburn the first couple games of the season. It's like, that's the team to beat. And you just don't think that when you see a team like UConn steamroll the competition, winning by double digits and 20 plus in all those games for 12 straight games in March Madness. you don't expect them to be vulnerable, but they appeared vulnerable even in bye games to me.
Yeah, I think the McNeely of it all is an interesting part of it too, because on one hand, Liam McNeely was asked to fill a role that I don't think was conducive to his skill set. He's a very talented player, but I think he needed to be more of a role player. And that's not meant as like he can't be a star or anything, as you alluded to. Like, they had players who were stars, but also stars in their role. And I think that's what McNeely was kind of envisioned to be, and what I think he was more than capable of being, but he was asked to do more than that. And I think it's really unfortunate to me that it impacted his draft stock the way that it did. And I know that the big thing with him was, he didn't shoot it all that well, and he's billed as like a 3-point shooter who didn't have a great percentage, which, it was a small sample size, especially with his injury. But I just think he was asked to do too much. And I think you mentioned Aiden Mahaney, and being asked to fill a role similar to a Tristan Newton. I know Mahaney wasn't asked to fill that same role, but like they just didn't, with Diarra's injury and with, Solo Ball was great. I mean, he was excellent last year, but Mahaney just could not fill that depth role as a guard that they really needed. And then, Samson Johnson and Tarris Reed were very, very good, but there wasn't a lot of depth in the front court outside of those two guys. And you just saw a team that they kind of sputtered. I mean, they went 4-0 to start in the Big East, and yet then they went 6-6 over their next 12 Big East games. And that was kind of during the time that McNeely was missing some time. So I'm sure that was a big factor for them. But even despite all of that, they get themselves into the tournament, and then they play Florida all the way to the wire, the eventual national champion Florida Gators. 77-75 was the final score there. So we saw this team kind of have a little kind of push towards the end of the year and finish on a relatively high note. I know that Hurley and UConn fans would not call losing in the round of 32 a high note, but considering the way that they played the best team in that tournament, it's certainly not a bad thing. And now they head into a year, and we'll get into some of the details about their offseason in a second, but they head into next season, and there was not as much drama about Dan Hurley leaving this offseason as there was last offseason. Obviously, the New York Knicks job did open up, and his name was floated out there, but he kind of quickly shut that down. And Alex Karaban didn't have as much drama about whether he was going to come back either. He pretty quickly said, yeah, I'm back for year 4. I'm going to be a 4-year guy for this program. And so now we're looking at a team that, again, we'll get into some of the specifics on the roster, but with Hurley coming back without as much drama this offseason, it feels like UConn's kind of tried to refocus themselves to figure out what went wrong last year and what can we do to put this team in a position where we're not, we're not a loss away from being on the bubble, which it felt like they were a few times last year.
Well, the interesting thing about UConn is I never felt like they were on the bubble because they had that stretch where they lost those games in Maui against inferior competition against Colorado. You'd say Memphis is fine, but that was a bad tournament. But they came back and beat Texas. And though Texas wasn't great, it was a big win. They beat Baylor, and they played against Gonzaga. Like you look at those schedules and you say there's no way they don't make the tournament unless they lose every one of those games. Yeah. So I never really felt like they were on the verge of not making the tournament as much as it felt like that from the UConn fan base. It was so used to 37-3 with offensive efficiency through the roof. Right. Their defense is what struggled this year. This past season, I should say. So this year, swinging it to the upcoming season, I think they rebuilt the roster in a way that is more a replica of how they won the titles. What I mean by that is Silas Demary looks like Tristan Newton in the sense of he's a big guard who at his previous stop is a pretty good shooter, but you wouldn't say like a dead eye who fills the box score both in terms of offense, points, rebounds, assists, and defensively can get engaged. You still have Alex Karaban. He should be improved from the freshman year, sophomore year, Alex Karaban, even though his numbers took a dip. It's not that he's a bad shooter. It's just that he was higher on scouting report. You put him back down on scouting report, that's good. Solo Ball resembles Jordan Hawkins. He comes off screens and drains threes. And the front court, I would say that neither Tarris Reed nor Samson Johnson last year could do what Donovan Clingan did, and neither could do what Adama Sanogo did, but it's still a strength because Tarris Reed's a really good big. They also bring in a second big, and that's the biggest point, is that they've always had two, I wouldn't say dominant in the case of last year or in the case of Samson Johnson backing up Sanogo / Clingan, but they did have a 1-2 punch. Last year, though they had a 1-2 punch, they were always in foul trouble, so it became less important. And then you look at the wings, Liam McNeely's a pro, he's a first-round pick, Karaban's back, but I think there's more depth. You have the freshmen coming in who, time will tell how they'll play, but you also bring back Stewart, Ross, and Karaban. So I think their depth is more conducive to success. But the biggest one to me is Demary versus the Mahaney/Diarra of it all. And I think Demary resembles Tristan Newton, who was kind of the engine for UConn's success those 2 years.
Let's get a little bit more into that, Leaf, because I think that's a great part of this conversation is what was the roster overhaul this offseason and how is it indicative of what this team might play like next season? We're going to talk about all of that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, time to fuel up and turn it up with 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick and energizing shot. So whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with your friends, this is a hole-in-one for your energy game. And let's be honest, some days when you're out on the course or just out at home, you really need that extra boost to stay sharp and energized. And golf, it's all about having good times with good people and good flavors. And the grape ginger lime flavor gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without having to chase down the beverage cart. If you go to 5hourenergy.com today, that's the number 5hourenergy.com, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONGOLF to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. So whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion flavored 5-Hour Energy shots today. All right, folks, continuing our conversation here, talking about Dan Hurley and the UConn Huskies. We talked about their season last year. We talked a little bit about some of the changes they've made onto this roster. And Leaf, I want to continue that part of the conversation. And you talked a little bit about Demary, and I do want to get into him and what he brings to this team and that kind of Tristan Newton comp. But I think a common thread, especially in the last couple of years of college basketball. And I'm going to paraphrase a quote from the great Trilly Donovan, who's been a college basketball staple for the last few years on social media, is that the best gets are the ones that you already have. Like being able to retain talent is so vital in the modern era of college athletics. And while UConn lost 7 players from last year's roster, including 4 of them who left in the transfer portal. None of them were particularly key pieces. The most notable was Aiden Mahaney, but as we talked about, he didn't have a particularly great year for this team. And they keep 5 key pieces. 3 of them being guys who are projected not only to start for this team, but 2 of them were their leading scorers last year outside of Liam McNeely. That would, of course, be Solo Ball and Alex Karaban. You also keep Tarris Reed, who's going to step into an even bigger role after playing. I mean, again, this is the way that Dan Hurley's machine has worked in the front court, where the guy who was the backup center steps into the starting role. It's what Klingon did. It's what Samson Johnson did. It's now what Tarris Reed is going to do. And then you keep a couple of key depth pieces in Jalen Stewart and Jaden Ross. When you look at these returners, what do you kind of see in terms of how this could help UConn to have this kind of continuity, to have key pieces in the front court and in the back court and on the wing, kind of all back in the mix for Coach Hurley's team?
I mean, everyone's going to talk about Karaban, right? They're going to say, okay, Karaban's back. He's started 111 of 112 games, I think, in his career. He's hit shots. Solo Ball was the leading scorer on the team, if I remember correctly. And I think the guy that I'm most excited to see come back is the growth of Tarris Reed as the starter, the unquestioned starter. I thought he was a very, very good and pleasant surprise last year after what was mediocre results in Michigan. And then, more importantly, I thought that Jaden Ross and Jalen Stewart were good in their limited minutes. They just had an NBA first-round pick in front of them and Liam McNeely. And the year prior, they had guys that were NBA players as well. So I'm excited to see that tandem. And then they also bring in freshmen. And so I think the wings will be an overwhelmingly good success for UConn, because if one of them is not great, Hurley's going to find the next one. And I think that they have NBA wings on this roster, and maybe multiple of them. And that's not something you can say about most teams, especially not, okay, we have 2 NBA wings, we're going to start both of them. UConn may easily have 2 or 3, and not all of them will start. And Dan Hurley will push the right buttons. But like I said, the one I'm most excited about is Silas Demary a Tristan Newton clone? Probably not going to be a first-team All-American. That's probably not going to happen. But can he do the things that made Tristan Newton so valuable, even the year he wasn't? a first-team All-American, that's what has me excited. And I think what they retain is really important because they know how to play UConn basketball. And last year there was too many moving pieces, both in terms of new additions but new roles.
Let's talk about what this lineup might look like and some of the other new guys coming in. You've obviously talked about Demary a handful of times, and I'm with you 100%. He's an extremely talented player, was fantastic for a Georgia team last year that had some talented pieces but could never quite put everything together. I think that Demery's going to fit very nicely in Danny Hurley's offense. They also bring in Malachi Smith from Dayton, another experienced guard, averaged over 5 assists per game in the A-10 for the Flyers last year, 38% three-point shooter, a couple depth transfers coming in, Dwayne Karoma from Lemoyne and Alec Melender from IU Indy. And then they got the freshman class and 2 very notable freshmen coming in, Braylon Mullins, who's a borderline top 10 player in this recruiting class, 6'4" combo guard. And then Eric Reibe, a 7-footer, the 36th ranked player in the class. Like you said, kind of that next potential option to replace Tarris Reed in the front court down the line. So the first question I have, Leash, is looking at the backcourt. I'm kind of trying to figure out how this lineup is going to work, because I think there's obviously no debate that Solo Ball is going to start. There's no debate in my mind that Silas Demary is going to start. So then what do you do with that other spot? Because you could start Malachi Smith, but he's pretty undersized. And if you're starting Smith, Ball, and Demary, that's not a very big backcourt. And there's not room for Braylon Mullins to start. I feel like Braylon Mullins is probably good enough to start right away as a freshman. Danny Hurley's not afraid to start freshmen right away. Case in point with McNeely and Karaban before that. So kind of who's the odd man out here? I have my suspicions on who it probably is, but I'm curious your thoughts on kind of how that guard rotation is maybe going to shake out for this team.
Well, I think they played 2 what I'd call guards, and then 2 wings and a center. And so the guards to me are going to be Demary and Ball, and I don't think it's very, very close. And if you were to ask me what the starting lineup's going to be, I would say Karaban's a shoo-in and Reed's a shoo-in, and my guess would be it's going to be Stewart or Ross over one of the freshmen. And so what the numbers would tell you is that Stewart will play. So that's my assumption, is that will be the starting 5.
Yeah, I wrote down my starting 5, and it's basically exactly the same. I think, to me, you're right. Demary, Ball, Karaban, and Reed are locks. The 3 returners and Silas Demary are all locks. I think Mullins might start over Stewart, but I think it's going to absolutely be a competition. Stewart's, a veteran guy who's been in the system for a while, averaged 5 points per game last year, good 3-point shooter. Mullins is going to have to prove it. And, I think a lot of 5-star freshmen coming in kind of expect that they're going to start. And Danny Hurley's not just going to give you a spot because of how you were ranked out of high school. So I think that's going to be the most interesting competition for a starting spot. But then what great depth you have, because you have Reibe coming off the bench, again, a top 40 freshman, maybe top 30 freshman by many accounts. You also have Malachi Smith, a guy who has had some injury issues in his career, but averaged over 5 assists per game last year, like we said, for Dayton. And then you have either Mullins or Stewart coming off the bench. You have Ross coming off the bench. You have their other freshman, Jacob Furphy, coming off the bench. You got the other 2 transfers, the depth options that we talked about, Karoma and Melender. Like, this is a team that I think has some pretty significant depth. If I had a spot that I would maybe nitpick a little bit, again, I think it's just the front court depth outside of Reed's going to be great, but he didn't play a huge amount of minutes last year. Karaban obviously is somebody you can rely on pretty heavily when he's healthy to play the 4. But outside of that, you're expecting a lot out of Reibe right away, and I think he can give you that. But then the depth gets a little bit questionable. That's my one kind of nitpicky spot about this roster, but I like everything else about how this team has really come together. Is there a spot or kind of something that you're seeing that you're like if anything's going to trip up Hurley and the Huskies this year, it's this? Is there something that stands out to you?
I do think there's going to be growing pain. I think at UConn's not the easiest place to go play point guard. While I'm bullish on Demary, I think even Tristan Newton had games where you'd say, well, I mean, who knows what's going to happen here? UConn that year, remember, was a 4 seed. They started off fantastically. They were 14-0, if I remember correctly. And then they lost 6 of 10, 6 of 12 games, maybe I think they lost 6 of 8, and they went 6-6 to start Big East play. This is off the top of the dome. I could be slightly off, but I know they lost 6 of 8 games. And you would say, okay, what were the issues here? And I would say it was guard play and knowing how to play teams that are scouting you and have the athletes to thwart those guys. And that would be the point guard wasn't able to exploit it as much. Now, I think the point of the weakness in their lineup is not Demary. I think that's the point that people will point to of, oh, that's the point guard, right? Like that's the guy who needs to be running the offense. I would say the weakest position in terms of success thus far would be who starts between Stewart and Ross. And then Jacob Furphy is a guy I'm high on. I do like Furphy. I don't think he starts. I see someone in our comments is talking about that. I don't think he starts at least right away. I think it'll be a veteran. That's how Hurley works. And I also am pretty high on Stewart. But I think that's going to be the person people say, oh, he should get shifted because Demery's going to be highly regarded. I think Demary will shoulder blame, though, if they struggle because he's the point guard.
Yeah. Well, UConn's not participating in an MTE this year, as Danny Hurley made it very clear last year after Maui that he did not want to do that anymore. But that does not mean the Huskies don't have a very challenging non-conference slate, 6 tough games by my count. And we're going to wonder whether that could prepare them for another national championship run. We're going to talk about this schedule, how we think they're going to do in the Big East, and make some predictions on how this team might finish overall next season. All that coming up here in just a second. All right, folks, closing out the show, continuing our team preview, the first team preview of the 25-26 season here on Locked On College Basketball, talking about the UConn Huskies here with Leaf to lead. And Leaf, I'm going to start, I'm just going to rattle off the team's non-conference schedule that we have right now. And we're going to kind of just take a look at how we think this team might do in these games. Similar to last year, UConn starts their season with a handful of bye games. Last year, they had the 4 bye games before they went down to Maui and participated in that event. This year, they start with 3 bye games. They open up against New Haven on the 3rd of November, and then they play UMass Lowell on the 7th, and then Columbia in the Ivy League on the 10th. And then after that, they will take on BYU in Boston on November 15th. That is an incredible matchup. Very, very fun one there. And then right after that, 4 days later, they'll take on Arizona, Tommy Lloyd and the Wildcats on the 19th, Bryant on the 23rd, Illinois, another really fun one, that game at Madison Square Garden on November 28th. Then we get into December and they play their lone road game of the non-conference slate, December 2nd at Kansas. UConn going to Fog Allen to take on Bill Self and the Jayhawks. That's a fun one. One more bye game against East Texas A&M on December 5th, and then they take on Florida on the 9th at Madison Square Garden, Texas, in Hartford on the 12th of December as well. So for me, Leaf, I see 6 pretty tough games here: BYU, Arizona, Illinois, at Kansas, Florida, and Texas, obviously sprinkling in a handful of bye games as well. And for a team that, is coming off a rough year, that has had a fair amount of roster turnover, 7 departures, 8 newcomers. I applaud Danny Hurley and the Huskies for putting together what looks like a pretty competitive schedule here. And while they're not traveling too far for a lot of these games, I still think this is a schedule that's going to help prep this team pretty well for what will be a tough Big East play, as well as obviously contending for a national championship.
I mean, there's definitely standout games, right? Like you look, they play Florida, and that's going to be an awesome game, both because of how great the matchup was in the second round of the tournament, but also it's the champions from the 2 of the last 3 years in UConn versus last year's champion in Florida. And so I think the question will be, how quickly does this team coalesce and actually hit their stride? But I'm far less worried about a season following the script of last year where they lost games and kind of looked out of sorts. Yeah. There was moments even in Maui where they were ranked number 2 or 3 in the country, and you thought, wow, like, who's this team's best player? And you thought it'd be Karaban. He struggled shooting the ball, and there was no answers. I don't think there's going to be answers of apparent issues in terms of, wow, this guy's really struggling to shoot the basketball. Who's going to score? I think they're going to have plenty of scoring. Really, I think they're going to be better defensively. I actually think this is one of the best 3 teams in the nation coming into the season, at least. I think their only issue is going to be in terms of how easily does Demary adapt to Hurley's very intricate offensive system, whereas at Georgia it was a lot of run and gun, and he was the beneficiary of scoring in transition or shooting spot up threes. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities for him to really assert himself as an all Big East type of guy. But I think that Danny Hurley's confident in his team this year because he's playing playing teams that are good early on, as opposed to last year. He said, I'm never going to do an MTE again, which I thought was stupid to begin with. But it's basically, it's basically saying that he has a lot more faith in this year's team, and last year was riding the fumes of winning a couple championships, but the team was different. Like, you could sense it. And you watched them play. I want to say they played New Hampshire or something like that, and they won by 30 something, but it didn't look good if you watched the game. And these other games, they could win by 20, but look dominant for a stretch, then just play the backups. I think this is going to be a team with a motivation, which is scary because Danny Hurley's proven X's and O's wise he's a wizard.
Yeah. Well, what I like about the schedule too is they're two tough early games. BYU on the 15th and Arizona on the 19th. I mean, that's their 4th and 5th games of the season. BYU, they're playing in Boston, so it's home for them, but not quite home. And those are two pretty young teams. I mean, BYU obviously has AJ Dybansa coming in, who's a matchup nightmare for everybody, and certainly will be a challenge for UConn defensively. But that's a pretty young team. You got Rob Wright coming in. They do have some veteran guys coming back. Richie Saunders, a notable one. Arizona also has some key pieces returning, but also has a lot of youth. Koa Pete likely going to take on a big role for that team, but they have Toby Awaka back. They have Krivas back. They have Jaden Bradley back. Like, those are going to be tough teams. And for me, UConn doesn't need to win both those games. They probably don't want to lose both those games, or if they do, there's a lot more pressure on that game against Illinois and that road game against Kansas. But, I look at these 6 tough games, which is those 4 and then Florida and Texas. And even in my highest optimism for UConn this year, I don't think they go 6-0 because that's just a really tough set of games. I mean, Florida is going to be really tough. I'm not super sold on Kansas yet. I'm still skeptical, but anytime you got to play them at Fog Allen is a tough game without a doubt. And again, Arizona and BYU are going to have their growing pains as well. So I think it's going to be a matchup of a UConn team that's still finding itself against BYU and Arizona teams that are also still finding themselves. So I was kind of trying to guess on how I think this team's going to do. I put them at 9-2, which is probably my most optimistic that I could see this team going in the non-con. I would think Florida and probably Kansas are my 2 losses, but I wouldn't be shocked if they lose to either Illinois or Arizona or even BYU. I think Texas is probably a team they beat, but like, this is going to be a tough schedule for them. And Danny Hurley hates to lose more than anybody in this sport, but ultimately they don't need to go 6-0 or 13 or 11-0, 6-0 against these good teams in order to be ready for Big East play. They can go 9-2. They could go 8-3 even, and be more prepared for what's going to be a tough conference slate with a St. John's team that looks very, very dangerous, with the Creighton team that admittedly lost some incredibly talented pieces, including Ryan Kalkbrenner, but they're still going to be good. Marquette's always in the mix. We'll see if Villanova can take a leap, but I think that this schedule sets up UConn well, not only to have a resume that puts them as a potential top 3 or 4 seed, but also sets them up well to compete for one of the top 2 spots in the Big East.
I think they go 10-1 or 11-0.
Nice, even bolder. I love it.
No, and I don't mean that as like as a one-up type of comment. Like, we've done this long enough. I actually believe that they're a top 3 team, and I think every year both these guys, both these teams that we talked about in terms of Florida, I talked with Isaac about last time, and UConn, you think about, okay, they won a championship the year before Florida, or the last year talking about UConn. It's you have this responsibility to be good because that's how college basketball's expectations are. I think UConn's got the weight of the world off their shoulders, and they have a better team. Like, their team is significantly better 1 through 5. And this is not just saying because they turned out badly, but once again, I was lower on in UConn last year. And before the season, if we pull up our old boards, I think I had them 7 or 8. This year, I have them 2 or 3. And I need to finish out my way too early rankings. But talent-wise, calling a spade, they're better at every position, except for you can make the argument they're not as good at the 3 with McNeely. And I would argue that's true because I really liked McNeely. But Karaban's going to be better than he was last year. Reed's going to be better than he was last year. Demery's way better than what Mahaney was, and Diarra. And I think you're going to see growth from solo ball. So like 4 of the 5 positions at least. And they have an NBA caliber guy coming off the bench in Furphy, as well as, other top 25 recruits, and just a hungry Danny Hurley. So every year there's a team that runs through non-conference, and they're just better than everyone to start the season. Last year was Auburn. If the championship had been played in November, Auburn wins the title. Right. And I think 2 years ago, UConn was dominant. And the year before that, UConn was dominant. They went 14-0. I really think that UConn's going to be that team. It's going to be UConn, Duke, and Purdue are the 3 best teams in college basketball. I think they're going to be the 3 best teams all year. I'll just shoot that shot right now. But I think they're going to come out and dominate. I wouldn't be surprised if they go 11-0, even in that rigorous non-conference. If they lose, I think it'll be one of the true road games. And so I don't hate your assessment of it being Florida. I think Florida's awesome, but I don't love their team as much. I think UConn's got a better team than Florida this year. I think that a true road game is the most likely loss as opposed to a neutral against a higher level, higher echelon opponent. So that's my take. I think UConn's going to be a true national title contender from the get-go this season.
It's a perfect spot to end it, Leaf. Thank you so much. Always love doing these team previews. Excited to have many more of them coming up over the next couple of months here, but that is going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Thursday's show, we'll have another team preview. This time we're moving over to the Big Ten. Should be a fun one for you there. And then Friday, Isaac and I will continue our junior breakout conversation from Tuesday's episode. If you listen to that one, definitely check out Friday as we'll finish that conversation up. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. Cheers to the Mick Bruins. And until next time, peace out.